When you're near a river, it just is it's just restoring, really. You might go and you've had a really bad day or something like that and you just hang out by a river for a little while and it just makes you feel so much better. It just makes you clear your head, clear your mind, refresh the spirit.
Kia ora, and welcome to The Tramping Life, a podcast about hiking in Aotearoa, New Zealand, or as we call it here, tramping. I'm John T, and in each episode I chat with people who share a passion for exploring this incredible country. We'll hear about the tracks they love, the huts they return to, the lessons they've learned, and what keeps them heading back into the bush. My guest today is Corina Jordan, Chief Executive of the Game Animal Council and Fish and Game New Zealand. She's a key figure in Aotearoa's New Zealand policies on hunting, fishing and wildlife. I'm delighted to welcome her to the podcast. So what were your first memories of being outdoors?
I have a lot. I was really lucky. I got raised with quite a large family unit and we used to spend our childhoods running around with my cousins up in the North Island, a little place called Tauranga Bay in Northland. And we used to just essentially go crazy. We would be snorkeling and diving, trying to get flounder and that sort of thing, just running around with cousins really on the beach and in the environment. Around there, they've also got a lot of hills and things like that. So we'd spend our times running up and down the hills, climbing down cliffs. And when I wasn't doing that, I was riding horses in New Plymouth. I'd be out on the farm riding the horses. My family was always really outdoorsy, so we would be out exploring the beautiful environment that New Plymouth and Taranaki has to offer, in particular the mountains. Yeah, Mount Taranaki.
And do you remember what your first multi-day adventure would have been?
Probably camping, I would think, up in Tauranga Bay. So we would just camp up there and then we'd go fishing out on the boat, out to the islands, back to camp. That would probably be my earliest experience. But obviously I've spent a lot of time in the outdoors camping. One of my favourite places to go camping at the moment is a little campsite on the banks of the Rangitikei River. And I'm lucky enough that I can get down there with my horses. So I'll take the horses down there and the dog and we'll camp for a few days and fish and swim and just generally enjoy the Rangitikei River, which has got a water conservation order on it. It's a beautiful spot.
And a little bit easier than carrying all your own gear. I never really thought of the idea of taking a horse with you.
They are super handy. Yep, you can pack a lot of gear in on a horse.
What has been some of your most challenging trips, whether physically, mentally or logistically?
We've had a few of those. They're the ones that you sort of are in it and you're like, why did I decide to do this thing? But they're the ones that leave you with the best memories afterwards. One of them, we're up in the Ruaheines. We got choppered in helping Doc do stoat lines. That was one of my first sort of events. It was a 3-day stoat line. And the route we were doing was really long, really steep, and the bottom of it had a river, so we were having to do the stoat line along the river, and there was a lot of river crossings up that area. The rivers are really big and bouldery, and I was finding it really difficult to find my feet, so I was constantly just in the water, falling over, and I ended up getting hypothermia. Yes, so that was a super unpleasant experience. We were very probably close to pushing the personal locator beacon, but we had helicopters on standby, so they came in and got us out just a little bit earlier. For me, it was a good learning experience. I think it helps when I'm out working with other people and hunting and things like that to just appreciate how quickly you can get cold and how serious that can be. So I'm always like checking people have got the right gear, got the right jackets, and we've got backup plans in place.
Do you have any favourite campsites or huts?
There's quite a few around here that are just amazing. Ruahine huts, really gorgeous. But I think my favourite one is just camping by the Rangitikei River. I quite like just finding great places and then just camping out rather than utilising the huts, though I have, and they've been great when the weather's turned and things like that.
So you must have a bit of a daily commute from where you are, or can you do a lot of your work remotely?
I'm pretty lucky with working for the Game Animal Council, and also I'm part-time seconded to Fish and Game as their CEO at the moment. I work from home when I can, but mostly I do a lot of travel. So I'm travelling a lot around the country to meet up with different groups. I do quite a bit of work in Wellington, obviously, with politicians and with the ministries. And I spend a fair amount of time down on the South Island.
So some listeners may not be familiar with the Game Animal Council or Fish and Game New Zealand. Could you give a bit of an intro of what they do?
Yeah, definitely. The Game Animal Council, it's a fairly new statutory organisation. It's had its own Act of Parliament that was put into place in 2013. And it's got a statutory role to advise the Minister on game animal management and to represent the voice of hunters, essentially. And so it does a lot of advising the Minister. It works a lot with the Department of Conservation, and it works a lot with our foundations. And so when I talk about foundations, I'm talking about non-governmental groups, the hunter-led groups, where they're proactively managing herds in various parts of the country, or they have an interest in those herds. Sika Foundation comes to mind, Wapiti Foundation, we've got the Tahr Foundation, we've got the Heritage Red Deer Foundation, and there's a new trust set up in Rekiora looking after the white-tailed herd down there. So I do a lot of work with those groups. Essentially a lot of work advising on management, ensuring that we're valuing our game animals, but we're managing them as well, so we can have the hunter outcomes as well as the conservation outcomes.
Can you explain to me a little bit about the Wapiti Foundation, because it may not be familiar to all listeners or to myself?
So the Wapiti Foundation's just been operating in the Fiordland National Park area. Since about 2004, the Fiordland Wapiti Foundation advocated for and secured the right to manage the impacts of wapiti deer as part of the Fiordland National Park Management Plan. And on an annual basis, they cull several hundred deer within the Fiordland National Park. They'll cull the red deer to make sure that they aren't within that area and hybridising with the wapiti, and they'll cull the females, so they'll make sure that it's a smaller herd that can live sustainably within that environment without impacting on the environment, and it provides a really good hunting resource at the end of the day as well. They run a ballot system, so each year they hold a ballot. Hunters from across the country apply for that ballot. If they're successful, they'll go in for a period of time and then hunt wapiti and then come out again. And hunters will pay for that ballot. So that money that hunters contribute to the ballot or to the ability to hunt the wapiti and goes then into managing the wapiti herd and then managing also for those conservation outcomes.
And then Fish and Game New Zealand?
It's another statutory organisation. This one's an old one. It's established under the Conservation Act in 1983, I think. It has the role for managing sports fish and game bird populations in the interests of hunters, and it has on-ground, hands-on management that it does for these species. So think sports fish like trout and salmon, game birds like mallards, and also some of our indigenous species of game birds as well, like pukeko and paradise shelljack. So it manages those, it advocates for their habitats. They also do wetland restoration and rehabilitation as well.
When do they get their funding from?
So Fish and Game's funded by licence holders. So Fish and Game charges a licence for freshwater fishing or game bird hunting, and so that funds the organisation. Gets a little bit of donations and things like that. It's predominantly licence holders. The Game Animal Council, that's just got a small budget and it's funded through Vote Conservation, though it's looking for developing independence in its income stream so it can add more value to management and hunting across the country.
What are, some of the challenges that the different organisations face?
I think the challenges for the hunting sector and for the Game Animal Council is really unpacking the role of valued introduced species in New Zealand. Those are ungulates, so our deer and our pigs, and advocating for a more modern conservation approach. At the moment, we've got the Game Animal Council, which is quite new, 2013, but then we've got this really old Conservation Act or framework that's in place that really needs to be modernised. Both of those don't talk well to each other. They're inconsistent. The Game Animal Council Act was about creating a new tool called Herds of Special Interest to empower hunters to lead on game animal management to deliver for both hunters and conservation. A great example of that is the Wapiti Foundation, really successful in this space. I suppose that's probably one of the biggest challenges for the Game Animal Council in the sector is getting those settings right so that we can all work together as a community, hunters and non-hunters alike, to manage these animals so that they reduce their impacts on the environment while still maintaining the intrinsic values that they have to our society, other values that they have, including the hunting values and the ability for our communities to go and collect beautiful free-range food from our bush kitchens and take it back to their communities, that type of thing. Fish and Game's got some different challenges. It's well established. It's probably coming into a reform period as well. The government's looking at creating a new Fish and Game Act because the Conservation Act's really old. It needs to be modernised. So what the government's going to do is pull Fish and Game out of the Conservation Act, create a new act for it, and that'll help streamline its processes and help modernise the organisation a little bit so it can go faster and deliver better, more efficiently for licence holders.
And is the hope for those legislative changes to take place within this government's term?
Yeah, that's right. So both changes are hoped to get over the line within this term of government. So the other one we've got for large game, for herds of special interest, is to get essentially 2 herds of special interest over the line. The government's aspiration is 2 anyway. That's Wapiti and Sika. So they're wanting to finish the Game Animal Council Amendment Act, get that landed, and then gazette 2 herds of special interest and have them in place within this term of government.
So the herds of special interest, is that a relatively new concept or something that's been around for a while and now it's got the opportunity to be implemented?
It's a new tool under the Game Animal Council Act, so that's 2013, but it's now trying to be implemented right now. We've essentially had the Wapiti Foundation acting in a way that's really consistent with what this tool intends to do for a long period of time, so we've got that great success story on the ground that shows us that this can be a really successful model. And now it's about really getting that tool embedded in legislation so it's enduring and enabling these hunters to develop the foundations to really lead on herd management on the ground for the interest of our wider communities. Now, it's a great showcase. What we know is hunters harvest around about 350,000 large game on an annual basis. And so that far exceeds the government pest control efforts. So if we can really empower that, we should be able to get these win-win outcomes that we keep talking about.
So what sort of changes would people see on the ground as a hunter and then potentially as a conservationist?
When we undertake game animal management, sometimes depending on where the herd is and the potential impacts it might be having, is we might reduce the size of that herd. In some parts of New Zealand, we've got large numbers of deer in particular and pigs, and their health has been impacted because they're eating beyond the holding capacity of the environment. And then when that happens, they also have impacts on the natural environment as well. So a modern conservation or management of game animals is to harvest the females. So we'll actively target to reduce the female population. At the same time, we'll take out male stags or male animals that have less potential to be a trophy or what hunters might be looking for. In that way, we'll improve the overall health of the herd. So you'll get better meat animals. You'll get better conservation outcomes because they won't be eating their habitat right down. And you'll also get a higher quality animal for those that are interested in the trophy aspect of hunting as well.
And is that implemented through recreational hunters and some professional hunters to be specific about the herd control aspects?
Yes, that's right. So it's generally done by recreational hunters, but there's a cull aspect to it. So it's not just recreational hunting on the ground. When you've got a well-managed herd, you might have a helicopter undertake a cull a couple of times a year or however often, depending on the needs of that herd. And that will help manage that herd down. So they will actively target the females in the period where there's low hunting pressure on that herd, so outside of maybe the raw or things like that. And then you'll have your ground hunters come in as well. So you might have a ground cull, but then you'll also have your normal hunting activities where they might be targeting bigger animals. They might be looking for a trophy, or they might be in there looking for high-quality meat animals.
And what's some of the pushback or some of the reasons that people might be sceptical?
When we went through the Game Animal Council Amendment Act, it was concerning. There was quite a push. There was a little part of our community, around about 20% of the submissions, I think, were pushing back against valuing introduced species. So they were saying these animals are introduced into New Zealand, they're a pest and they should be eradicated. So it was quite a hypothetical argument against enabling management tool that would deliver benefits for the herd and benefits for conservation. So there was general a pushback in relation to recognising these animals as valued and having management approaches which would recognise their value while also managing for their impacts.
I guess it's one of the challenges, often introduced species are controversial in conservation circles and how you put a value on something versus trying to eliminate the game animals.
That's right. They're treating it like a really polarising conversation where, for example, you can't have conservation outcomes while these animals exist. Whereas from my perspective and from the perspective of large parts of our community, you can have these animals and conservation outcomes. They can go hand in hand. And also there's a huge part of our community that value these animals. And so if you value these animals and you enable that community, they will actively help you manage the animals and also deliver for those conservation outcomes. And also from my perspective, it's all really about getting as many people out in our bush and our national parks as possible, because when you're in it and you're part of it, then you really value it and you'll protect it. You'll vote to protect it, or you'll contribute to policy which protects it, or you'll do work on the ground which protects it, like stoat lines, for example.
And how straightforward is it to collect the data to be able to really understand the herds?
So it's not really about setting in like a deer density or anything like that. What it is about adaptive management, and we know to have good adaptive management frameworks, you need to set your outcomes really clearly. And so that might be a conservation outcome. There might be a browse index that you want to use, and so you'd be monitoring browse and also seed ratio mixes and regeneration. And then you might have metrics around how healthy you want that herd. You might have metrics around your community engagement with that environment, with the conservation estate, with that national park. So that might be about access, also might be about, for example, hunter satisfaction or community satisfaction or something like that. When they're in that environment, how are they enjoying it? Is it living up to their aspirations?
What's the feedback been from DOC?
They've been really supportive of the Wapiti Foundation, the work that they're doing down there, and generally supportive of the HOSI type framework. We've still got to work through roles and responsibilities. That's an ongoing conversation, but I think they can see the value in engaging hunters to support conservation efforts in New Zealand.
And what's your perspective on wild pigs and where their position sits in the ecosystem?
Wild pigs are hugely valued, especially by mana whenua. They're seen as a food source in Northland, for example. They underpin the well-being of some of those communities as a really essential food source, so they're not to be undervalued. They do have impacts across the country, and we definitely need to manage for those impacts, and I know that there are areas where we have really high pig populations, so we need to be working to get those populations down.
It's about the right numbers in the right places.
Yeah, that's right. So it's about identifying their values, but managing for any impacts that they might have. And so that's different depending on the species, and it's different depending on the location. Like you might have a national park, for example, you want those impacts to be super low. You might have other areas where the communities will tolerate a few more impacts, for example, recreational hunting area versus a national park.
What's the latest position on tahr?
So tahr, again, a valued introduced species. They're endangered in their homeland in the Himalayas. They're an amazing animal. But again, they need to be managed for their impacts. So they need to be kept population low enough that they can be sustained within the environment, but within the holding capacity of that environment. They're quite a clever species. They do well in a lot of different environments. So we have seen their spread in the South Island. That's something that probably needs to be managed. But they've also got huge value. I think one bull tahr, someone told me, was worth about $40,000. So there's a huge amount of money within the species that can then be utilised to go back to supports economic well-being. And it could also be funneled back into support conservation efforts as well. And we've got the Tahr Foundation, and they're amazing. They're doing incredible work down there, working with the Department of Conservation to manage the tahr population. So again, it's a valuable hunting resource, supports the economic well-being down there with some of those businesses that are established around the herd, but also supports those conservation outcomes.
What about Canada geese?
Canada geese used to be considered a game animal under Fish and Game, so they're managed by Fish and Game. But the farmers became concerned that Fish and Game wasn't managing them well, so there was pushback from farmers. Canada geese got taken off the game bird licence, so they're no longer managed by Fish and Game. And since then, their population essentially quadrupled, skyrocketed, massive issues across the country. I think this is a great story because it talks about the value of valuing these animals and then managing them by experts that know how to manage them. So like for Fish and Game and hunters, managing the animals that they value. And historically, Canada geese, they were 100% managed by hunters, essentially. So hunters paid for their management. Now the cost of managing Canada geese, which aren't being managed, falls back onto our general ratepayer, and farmers are having to foot more of that bill.
So is that loophole going to be addressed through legislative changes?
At the moment, MPI is talking to Fish and Game about how to manage Canada geese, so we're providing advice on that. I'm not sure where their conversation is going to end up.
You've got the dual role of both across both organisations. There's some synergies, presumably, between the two of.
At this stage, I'm seeing just huge synergy across our hunting communities and our fishing communities. I go and catch up with deer stalkers and things like that, and one of the first questions I ask them to put their hands up, say who here hunts game birds or who here is a freshwater angler, and about 70% of the room put their hand up. So that just talks about that level of synergy or consistency across those communities. They're essentially the same community.
Your background was as a freshwater ecologist. I guess what changes have you seen over your career?
I've got a bit of a varied background. I worked in veterinary clinics in my earlier job and then retrained and became a freshwater ecologist amongst a whole lot of other things. But I suppose that background really gives me a passion for freshwater. I'm concerned about freshwater management across New Zealand. We've got some serious issues in some parts of the country. Some parts of the country are doing amazing. Headwaters of the Rangitikei and those middle levels, it's a beautiful river. We've got lots of rural communities. They've got really healthy freshwater that's going through them. So it's not an agricultural issue per se. But some of our areas, you think sort of central Canterbury, some of the Southland rivers and things like that, we've got some major issues. Our big urban centres, Auckland, major issues around freshwater health. And so I think as a community, we really need to be doing more in that space rather than just accepting or saying that these rivers should take up more of our pollution or more of our sediment or we should do more hard rock because of flood issues. I think we should think about them as an essential tool for climate change and adaptation, but also an essential tool to make sure we've got a really resilient environment.
And Fish and Game have an advocacy role around those, and then also some areas of management, so wetlands and restoration activities.
Yeah, that's right. $5, I think it is, from every licence sold for game bird hunting goes to the Game Bird Habitat Trust. And so it's a trust that Fish and Game set up, which specifically focuses on wetland restoration and rehabilitation. It's a huge amount of work. And what we know is we've only got about 9% of our wetlands left, and we still keep losing our small wetlands. And these are really essential habitats, not only for climate change and flood mitigation, and they're an essential tool within our farmers' toolbox for environmental management, but also they're essential habitat for our game species and our indigenous species. So they're vitally important, and we really need to be focusing on increasing the number of wetlands we've got across New Zealand, especially our small ones.
Thinking about the hunting community, have you seen statistics on how many people hunt and whether those numbers are stable or increasing over time?
It's really hard to survey hunters. Generally, they don't like talking to people. I'm kidding. They like to just go and do their own thing and not really be minded about what other people are really doing. And they're not really keen on answering too many survey questions. So it's quite hard to connect with them. We know there's probably around about 100,000 hunters out there. It seems the numbers are really stable, though it seems to me that we've got this emergence of people wanting to go hunting. So you're seeing younger people and a lot more women wanting to get into hunting. Deerstalkers run an amazing hunts course, and what they're telling me is that they are oversubscribed for the number of courses that they can run. So we know that there's a huge amount of interest out there.
It's interesting about the gender mix. Why do you think that's changing?
For me, I hunt because I find it really liberating. I really like the opportunity to be able to put food on my own table. It's empowering. I also think it's one of the most humane ways to be a meat eater. I'd much rather go and harvest a dead from the wild. I know it's been a wild animal. It's killed really quickly, really humanely, and then essentially it's broken down and on my table. So I know its whole journey. And so that lends me to hunting. And I think that's the same for a lot of communities out there, females and male. They're wanting to know where their meat comes from. They're wanting that sense of independence. I think for females as well, it's just wanting to learn new skills and maybe having a little bit more time, being able to get away from home and get out there and wanting to do something for themselves. It seems to be a real growing movement and a real sense of community that's starting to be established around females getting into hunting.
Now, what misconceptions do you think that trampers may have about hunters and vice versa? And how do you think the two communities could engage better with each other?
I think the other thing that's concerning me is firearms law reform and the perceptions of firearms ownership and use. It's a real concerning area. I think there's a social license challenge there. And so I think it's about probably getting more people into hunting or using firearms so people can see that they can be super safe. It's just a tool. They can be a lot of fun when they're used really reasonably and sensibly. So I think that's probably one of the things we're trying to do, get more people into firearms ownership and use, even if it's clay bird shooting or shooting at the rifle range, even if it's small bore like a 22, they're heaps of fun just at those little targets. And then from there, moving people into hunting. I think for hunters, it's about understanding that people are concerned when they see firearms, and so making sure it's really obvious that the firearm is safe, pointed in a safe direction. We do a lot of training around that. Probably acknowledging trampers and just saying the firearm is safe, it's empty, just taking them through what they've done so they know that they're safe to engage with. I think that's the same with the trampers are coming. They're tramping, they're not expecting to see a hunter. Next minute they see this camo person jumping out of the bush, armed. And it can be a bit confronting. And so I think it's just all of us understanding that we're just there to enjoy this beautiful environment, that hunters are really well trained, they're really responsible, they come from all backgrounds, and they're there to have a good time and to make sure that they're harvesting meat in a really safe, responsible way. And they'll often be taking that meat home to their family or their wider community.
There's lots of good places for hunting across New Zealand, but are there any ones that stand out, ones that are internationally renowned for?
Oh, I think New Zealand is internationally renowned as a hunting mecca. I know our sports fishing or freshwater fishing is world renowned, and we've got some of the best hunting in the world as well. That sika herd and the kawekas and the kaimanawas, I mean, that's an amazing herd. I personally think sika meat might be some of the best venison out there. It's incredibly easy to cook. They're a small animal, so it's easy to pack out. It's not like packing out a giant big red deer or something like that. But the South Island, it's just got amazing, beautiful, iconic hunting there. Thinking high country stations and Rakaia. You've got the greenstone and green cables and places like that.
What have some of your most memorable encounters with wildlife been?
Oh, I've had so many. They're great. So I'll go out hunting and sometimes I'll just look at them through the scope or through the binos. You shouldn't really probably be looking at them through the scope, but I just enjoy sitting on a hill and just watching the animals really. Chamois are one of my favourite. They're just charismatic and are just a gorgeous wee antelope that we have here in New Zealand. They're beautiful, stunning animals, and you don't get very many of them. They tend to self-limit. Their herd size are quite solitary. But really just anywhere you'll be out hunting and you'll sneak up and you'll see them feeding in a clearing. I really like watching the hinds and the yearlings interact. That's really cute. But also Indigenous species as well. So I was lucky enough that I was hosted down in Fiordland with the Wapiti Foundation, and we did a stoat line down there, and just I was really impressed with a number of whio that are within that area. And they're actively managing that stoat line across those rivers to protect the whio, and so the whio are doing really well. And I've also come across whio in the Rangitikei and the headwaters up there as well, and they're just a really charismatic wee bird, so it's great to see them in the wild. But also you've got our kia and our kaka and things like that. Yeah, they're incredibly charismatic parrots.
What have been some of your best work-related trips?
I was lucky enough to be hosted by NZ Hunter, so I've had a couple of massive bucket list type adventures there, and one was 4-wheel driving in the back blocks of the West Coast. That was incredible. But the one that really stands out for me was a horse riding hunt, so a big trek that we did from Lake Coleridge essentially. I think it was 5 days in all. It was a long time, and that was just incredible. So we were riding the horses packing everything in on the horses, riding along the rivers up to our camps, camping each night, and then hunting from there. One day we took the horses right up hunting. We were hunting with the horses, but from there we just then would leave them at the camp and then hunt on foot, and that was a really effective way of seeing a lot of the country. It was just a massive adventure. I got my first chamois and my first tahr, so it was really successful. And I missed one red deer, so I just about got the trifecta but missed out, so I'll have to do it again.
So just to finish up with what's on your bucket list of future trips.
I just try and get out as much as possible, really. I'm working really long hours and weekends and things like that. And so what I'm doing is just trying to plan to get out and do a bit more freshwater fishing. I want to have a really good look at Otago and Southland, try my luck down there. Oreti River comes to mind. I think that's the next one on my list. But also I really want to just get out for just a couple of day hunts, I think, even if I don't get anything, but just to stretch the legs and see other parts of our beautiful country.
Thank you so much for listening to The Tramping Life. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please follow the podcast in whatever app you use. Tell a friend about it and consider leaving a rating or a review. It really helps more people discover the show. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email at thetrampinglife, one word, @gmail.com.